Now that we've learned how to test services that have dependencies, I'd like to show you how to test a service that makes AJAX calls. The user resource service is a perfect example of this. If we look at the user resource service, we can see that it requires the resource object. Angular's resource object is a wrapper around its HTTP object and gives you easy access to RESTful services. But ultimately, behind the scenes, it's just making AJAX calls. So you can see here where I've defined the service, and then I've got a query all function that I've added for convenience. But it's also exposing all the methods that are already on the resource object, of which get is one. So I'd like to write a test that checks that I've configured my service correctly against the resource object, so that whenever I call get, it makes a call to the correct URL. So going to my test file, I'm going to be testing get. So I'm going to create a describe just for that. And inside here, I'm going to write a test that verifies that whenever I call get, that it actually issues a get request to the URL that I expect. So if I call get with an object with the username of Bob, the URL that it calls should be data user Bob. And again, I'm going to call that inject function so that I can get a handle on my user resource object. But I'm going to do something a little different here, and I'm going to add a second parameter to this function. The parameter I'm going to add is called HTTP backend. This is a special service that the Angular mocks library provides that allows me to mock out the XHR object. This object will intercept any calls to the XHR object and let me inspect those calls and determine if they were done correctly. It will also allow me to determine the data that I want to respond to those calls with. The way that I can tell the HTTP backend object to respond to a call is by calling its when function. And the first parameter I give it is the verb, and the second parameter is the URL. And then I call the respond function and tell it what to respond with. In this case, I'm going to have it respond with an object that has a name property, which is the string Robert. But again, it's only going to respond with this object if I make a call to the correct URL. So now let's go ahead and call our function that should ultimately make a call to this URL. Now I'm not done. There's a very important part. In order to simulate the asynchronous nature of XHR requests, I get to decide when the server responds to the request, and I do that by calling the flush method on the backend object. At this point, it's going to respond to that request. So now I can set up an expectation that the user is correct. And of course, as always, I need to be sure and invoke the module that has this service in it. Okay, let's run this test and see what we get. Okay, you can see that our test passed. So let's just mess with it a little bit and show it failing. I know it's making a call to this URL, but let's verify that by changing this URL. Now when I make this call, the HTTP backend is going to throw an error because it's going to get a GET request to a URL that it wasn't expecting. Okay, we can see we've gotten an error, so let's see what the message says. Okay, there's the error message we're looking for. It's an unexpected request with the verb and the URL. So now I can just go in and fix my URL, and our test will go back to green. And now we've learned how to test services that make AJAX requests.